Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hello everyone, and welcome to Wealth Pathways, the Affluence Science Insights Podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Marie Stella, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. As we reach a certain level of affluence, we think to ourselves to rent or to buy a house. Individuals are met with challenges of the lifelong dilemma of buying or renting a house. Does the cost of living outweigh the benefits of renting a house? Or will buying a house be a secure lifelong investment? So, in this episode, we're navigating house cost, buying versus renting the house, through weighing its pros and cons and understanding the current housing market. Guiding us through this is Alexandros Tziamalis, Assistant Professor of Economics and Finance at Higher Colleges of Technology in Dubai. So we're incredibly fortunate to have him here with us today. So welcome to the show, Alex.
Hello, hi. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for coming to our show. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what compelled you to pursue economics and finance?
I am Greek, so I have a Greek accent. Let's start by that. But I've been living. I lived for 20 years in the UK and 1 year in UAE these days. Why did I study economics? I mostly studied economics to get a job, to be honest with you. You know, when I was 17, I had absolutely no passion about economics whatsoever. My true passion was literature and history. But over the years, you do get a passion for what you study. You get trapped in, debates. You basically, apply yourself. You get confidence from it. So you end up actually loving what you study at some times. And this is what happened to me.
I see. So as you increase your knowledge in the economics realm, you get more used to it and get more confident in it.
Yeah.
Okay. And my first question would be, why is the decision between renting and buying such a hotly debated topic?
It's a very hotly debated topic for a number of reasons. One of those reasons is basically that it takes, statistically speaking, mathematically speaking, it takes more and more effort to buy a house. It takes more and more income. It takes more and more planning, and it is more and more difficult. I mean, if you could just get a house, it will be, it will be a no-brainer. I will just buy a house for $1 or 10 and I'll be living with it. But now that it is so difficult, people need to strategize more. There are different financial strategies when it comes to renting, and it's a bigger part of your life because you spend an ever increasingly bigger percentage of your income.
I see. And before we dive further into the topic, we'd like to get to know you better. So this is a segment called Have You Met Alex? Okay, Alex, can we get to know you a little bit? And my very first question to you would be, what's your favorite book?
My favorite book is Crime and Punishment by Fyodor
Oh.
Dostoevsky. It's a heavy book.
Yeah. I see. And what about any movies that you have enjoyed recently?
I cannot actually remember. I'm one of those guys who watches Netflix every second night, and then I basically forgot what I saw. But a movie that I profoundly enjoyed was something I watched young. It was the 3 installments of how was it called? Indiana Jones. Jones. I really enjoyed Indiana Jones.
I also love Indiana Jones. It's really fun to watch and
Yeah.
very adventurous. And are you listening to any podcasts at the moment?
I listened to a podcast by Paul Krugman, who's a famous economist, a Nobel Prize winner in economics, actually.
Oh, that's really intriguing. And do you have any role models so far that have built you to such a person so far?
Not really. I never had any role models. I am guided by a few principles like study, help other people, be kind, be patient, but never had one role model, I think.
I see. And throughout your lifetime, is there a course that has inspired you?
A course that inspired me was macroeconomics when I was about 20 years old in my degree. It's an area of economics that allows you to see how every economic metric is linked with the other economic metrics and allows you to see the big picture. That was beautiful.
I see. And now we can get into the main topic, which is navigating house costs. And for starters, we always ask this question: how would you define affluence?
I'm not quite sure, to be honest with you. Affluence is a very relative thing. So someone who used to be very, very rich, in a past century will have like 3 or 4 shoes to wear. These days, even poor people, especially in the West, they have more than 3 or 4 pairs of shoes. So affluence is a very relative thing, basically. It relies on what the wider society is doing. So let me give you an example. If you are well off, you live in your mansion, and you drive an average car, brand new car, but average, and then your neighbor comes home with a Ferrari or some fancy, expensive car, you suddenly feel very poor. And if all of your neighbors drive those cars, like Rolls Royce or Bentley or whatever they're called, those cars, and you drive a Toyota, then you feel very poor. So there is an element that is objective, having food, having a roof over your head, but there is also an element that is subjective and relative to the rest of the economy. So it is an ever-changing metric, being affluent.
I see. So in terms of wealth as inflation comes and economic changes in the world, the term affluence would change and increases over time. So like there's an inflation of affluence.
Yeah, that is true. We are used to more and more stuff, and these days we feel very poor if we don't have a car. A car will be a spectacular luxury just 50 years ago.
I see. And how would you define housing?
Housing, it's where you live, I imagine. I think, it's pretty easy to define. Or, I'm kind of missing something. I'm not sure if I'm missing something. But it's where you live.
I
Housing.
see. And how would you describe the relationship between affluence and housing?
I think the obvious thing here, the common sense, is that they are linked. So if you have housing, you're more likely to be affluent. If you are affluent, you're more likely to have housing. They are linked. If they're not linked, one is an impediment to the other. So if you are not affluent, it's more difficult to have housing. If you don't have housing, it's more difficult to have affluence.
I see. And is the old adage, right? Renting is throwing money away, still relevant in today's housing market?
Not quite. Not quite. There are
Oh,
many, many moving parts that one should actually consider. Many, many moving parts. For example, maybe you have bought a property, but you have bought it at a very high price. So, a rent might actually be preferable, or you have bought property, but the property is losing value. Imagine some kind of a luxury flat, apartment that you bought at the top of the market, and then you're actually losing a lot of money by buying this. Every year it, devalues. Other people pay a lot of charges for leasehold. So they have bought a property, they have a mortgage, many of them, but then they have to pay another slightly smaller mortgage on the service charges of a property. So
Mm.
it's a very complicated issue with many moving parts, actually.
Yeah, and many people actually assume that buying is always the smarter financial move. And as you mentioned, it depends on the place, right? So is it becoming more complicated the as the era progresses?
Yes, I think it does become more complicated in the sense that there are more loans, types of loans you can get for that house. There are more housing schemes, so you can part buy. You can buy a leasehold, you can buy a freehold in many, many countries. So it has become more complicated in that respect. But the very fundamentals are the same. What is the price you bought the house? How much money do you pay to actually maintain the house? How much money the banks or the leasehold company is making out of you? Um, and also, we have to factor in the personal circumstances of every individual, and these are not the same. So these very fundamental questions have remained the same for many, many, many years now, for many decades or even centuries now.
I see. And it is indeed complicated as different countries have different policies, right? So housing and renting becomes something that's quite complicated. And what are the main costs that go into home ownership?
The main costs are, obviously a mortgage, and you have to pay rent. I'm sorry, you have to pay interest rate for that mortgage. So imagine that you got a loan of $500,000 to buy, a rather big property, and then you have to pay 10% on it. So every single year, you pay $50,000, $50,000 just for the interest that the bank will earn. And then you have to maintain the house. Some houses need more maintenance than other houses. So if you buy a
Indeed.
wooden house in the US, for example, in a US suburb, a house made of wood, big one, obviously you will need more maintenance. Um, there is that. There are also service charges that you have to pay if you have a leasehold. So if you live in a flat, did you call flats, apartments in Australia, or do you call them flats?
Yeah, I think it's apartments.
Apartments. So if you do buy an apartment, so you have to pay money to the company that manages the grounds, and they clean the lobby, maintain the lobby, maybe a security guard, uh, clean the corridors, clean the windows on the outside, all those things. Sometimes these things are a small mortgage. It's a very high amount that some people pay for that. There is that. There is that. These are some main costs, but possibly the bigger cost, an even bigger cost that many people will have to pay, is the cost of not being geographically flexible. And
Oh,
what I mean by that is that you buy a property and statistically you would like to live where that property is. You can always rent it out and collect some income, but that's a little bit more complicated. Statistically, people who buy a property, they stay in an area. Owning a property is a disincentive to travel, disincentive to go to a different city, disincentive to change a job. So you are less mobile professionally, you are less mobile geographically, and that can cost you a lot. That can cost you a lot. Imagine that you are trapped in a low salary in a village in Australia or a very small town in Australia, just because you bought a very cheap house there. So
oh,
you may be earning a little bit, you may be saving a little bit because you don't pay rent, the house was cheap, but how much money are you losing every single month? You have lost the opportunity for a double salary in the city, triple salary if you are
I
successful,
see.
or more than that. So if you add up the monthly costs of this lost opportunity, it can amount to way, way more than the value of the house.
I see. So more like to the loss of opportunities, and that the costs of living in more of a suburb instead of being in the city that maybe is open and giving you more opportunities to make you more money.
Yeah, statistically, the people who move a lot geographically, the people who change companies every 2 or 3 years, these people, they end up with the highest salaries. These people end up with the highest, seniority in a company. So if you stay in a company, statistically, that's a very good, a very bad strategy to rise through the ranks. You basically wait for someone to get made redundant or go or die to get their post. This will take you decades. So the research shows that. Another thing that the research shows is that people who are geographically more mobile, from city to city, from country to country, these people end up getting more money in their lives. So a house ownership, a property ownership is actually an impediment to this mobility. And this will cost you millions of dollars over your lifetime.
I see. And that's actually quite a lot of money. And through that, what are the hidden costs of home ownership that buyers tend to overlook, since we have been talking about the main costs, such as the buying the house itself and the maintenance, and as you mentioned just now, the
One hidden
geopolitical
cost,
ones.
the major hidden cost, is basically what I just mentioned. It is the loss of your mobility, especially the geographical mobility. But the research also shows that people tend to underestimate how much money it will cost to maintain the property.
I see. So as we live in the property, the maintenance costs increases.
Yes, over time. Over time, a property that you bought and it was brand new and shiny and well kept, 20 years ago, now this property will need a new roof. And a new roof is a very, very expensive thing. It might cost you 50,000, Australian dollars to change the roof, and you never saw that coming up until 1 or 2 years before you change the roof. So the maintenance costs are very, very big. Another hidden cost is the depreciation of the value of this property, because uh, some property values, they do go down, especially for flats, for apartments. So you have lost money that way.
I see. And as we mentioned, all of these costs, how do maintenance, property taxes, and home appreciation rates factor into the long-term financial equation of buying a home?
Um, Taxes are country specific. So where I currently live in Dubai, there are no taxes. In Europe, you tend to have a lot of taxes. So they're country specific. So you have to do a more local search about the taxes in your particular area. But in some cases, it is a lot. It is 20% of the capital appreciation you have made from a property in Europe, most likely, or even 40%. That's a lot of money. So you do have to do your research about that. But let me also say that the price of a house or of a property can go down. I have to stress that once again. We are now currently living in an era where property is very, very expensive, and a lot of these properties, they will lose value at some point. So, for example, you had the 2008 crisis that reduced properties by about 20% or 30% in some countries. So a crisis can happen, it can last. There is this. And there is also the fact that some properties, especially some luxury properties that people buy for very high prices, properties that do not own land, and properties that rely on a hype, these properties can very easily go down. You also see that in Dubai a lot, but also in many cities like Sydney, London, Paris. Many properties will go down, especially the most luxurious properties.
I see. So there's a depreciation in that. And Historically, home ownership has been a key driver of wealth accumulation. And for us, the younger generation, right, is this still true, or have current economic conditions changed the narrative for home ownership?
Home ownership will help you build a wealth. It's fundamentally a good thing, but there are many caveats. As long as it doesn't get in the way of your career, that's the biggest caveat. As long as you can achieve a very high salary, as long as you can achieve training, education, despite and let's remember that education these days is lifelong. So you do have to travel sometimes, you do have to change your city, change your country even to achieve it. As long as home ownership doesn't get in the way of your career, um, yes, you can say that it will help you build affluence.
I see. And on the other hand, what are the financial advantages and disadvantages to renting?
The advantage is that you're very mobile. You can just
Mhm.
leave the place after a few months.
Correct.
The advantage is that you don't have to pay for any maintenance costs. If there is any
Mm,
depreciation in the property, you couldn't care less. And you don't have to pay leasehold fees or maintenance fees to any company. These are the advantages. And you're a free bird. You can chase a better job. You can go to another country. You can live your life this way. You
right.
can live your
Mhm.
life in a much more adventurous way than just live and die in the one place you were born. Um, so these are the benefits. These are the benefits. But there are also issues with renting, and I think we covered them. You do have to pay
Indeed.
uh, a lot of money for rent these days, and the rent has been going up.
Indeed. The rent is quiet. It has been increasing lately. And as you mentioned about mobility and ability to just jump from one renting place to another, in what other situations might renting build more wealth than purchasing a home?
Uh, I think that's it. I cannot really think of anything else. Let's just think that the main source of income these days is your career, is not from home ownership. You will have to own many houses without a mortgage for those properties to make up any loss of income, for example. So yeah, yeah.
I see. And I think we did touch base a little bit about renting and buying a house in urban areas and suburban. But what are other differences, and how do the rent versus buy considerations differ in certain urban areas in comparison to suburban or rural areas?
Yeah, when we talk about urban and suburban areas, there is a very important national component here. So, suburban areas in Paris, for example, or a few other big cities in Europe, they are considered a poor place. So, poor people live
Mm,
in the suburbs. In a place like Australia, I've never been, to Australia, but I would imagine that in a place like Australia, affluent people live in the suburbs in big, houses. They drive big cars and they commute to the city for their post jobs. So it has a different element. Affluent people in Paris live closer to the center. Actually, they don't live in the suburbs.
ah,
So there is this element of where you live because every place is slightly different. Another major consideration is basically transportation. So
mm,
is transportation easy, or it will cost you a lot? Cost you a lot in time, in money. You will have to buy a bigger car. You will have to maintain a bigger car. All this money for petrol, all this time you're there driving with nerves, swearing at the traffic. So there's a cost there, and you have to factor in that cost as well.
I see. So it's more to a social cultural differences as well as other moving costs that we have.
Yeah, yeah. And living in the suburbs is very onerous. It's very tiring for people who work, and most people work in the city. So it's very onerous. Most people, since you mentioned social stuff, there is social pressure for families in particular to live in the suburb. There is a social pressure in a place like Australia to raise your kids in the suburbs. It's different in Europe, but this is how I would imagine it is in a place like Australia, US, to raise your kids in the suburbs. So people will pay dearly to satisfy this social mandate of how perfect families would look like and where the perfect location for that perfect family should be. So they will pay a lot. Construction companies and estate agents will make a dime out of it.
I see. So it really depends on how each countries describe what a perfect family would look like. And then from there, we can see where, like in terms of location, these affluent people would live in the urban or the suburban areas. That's interesting. Yeah. And there has been a concept called starter home, which refers to a home that's smaller and less expensive than typical homes in an area that first-time buyers should be able to afford. How relevant is this concept in today's landscape?
It's a very good idea. If you cannot afford something big, get something smaller. That is a very good idea. The other thing that makes this a very good idea is basically that statistically you can sell a smaller house more easily than a bigger house. The market
I
is
see.
bigger. So there is that. It's a very good idea. If you cannot afford something big, go for something small, reduce your loan, reduce the money you pay for interest rate, reduce any leasehold expenses or maintenance expenses that you pay to the company that maintains the grounds of this apartment. Yeah, it's a very good idea. It's a very good idea.
I see. And how viable is this approach in comparison to renting?
It will, in some situations, it will save you money. It will save you
I
money
see.
in some situations, but the devil is in the details. So if you do buy a small home and they try to burden you with very high maintenance costs, or if it's a small home but it's also a very, let's say, dilapidated home, so you have to be forking out a lot of money to do it up, or it's a small home, but it's actually a very expensive home. Some small homes are very expensive. They're marginally cheaper than a slightly bigger home. Then in that case, it's not as much of a great idea.
I see. So it depends on the contracts and how diligent we are at looking at the fine prints, the terms and conditions.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And there's an approach to housing investment called rent vesting, where you rent where you live and purchase investment property where you can afford to. What are your thoughts on taking this route?
In principle, it sounds like a great idea, and in some cases, it can be a great idea. But you have to be very careful, because if you buy that, you will very likely be entering a legal context that you don't really know. So if you buy properties in Dubai, for example, you're dealing with a market that you don't really know if you live in Europe or the US or Australia. So you have to invest in a place that you actually know what's happening. And because knowledge is power, and knowledge maximizes any financial return. So be very, very careful to make a lot of research before you buy in a place that you don't currently live, especially if it's in a foreign country. And the obvious thing is that you will have to be paying extra money to some kind of an agency,
Mm.
to basically manage this property. So many people will take their cut out of you. Many people will take a small or bigger percentage of any profit. So we're talking about the agents, we're talking about um, tradesmen who will charge you more if you're not a local. If they have the perception that you're a landlord, you're affluent, they will try to charge you more. And of course, we're talking about the banks. The banks will also charge you usually a higher interest rate if you don't
I
live in that
see.
property, because their risk goes up if you have tenants. So
Uh,
they will charge you a higher interest rate in the loan as well. And of course, the people who will try to sell you that property, they will see someone from the city, someone who they think is very affluent, and they will also try to sell you that property at a higher price. So the devil is in the detail, as always. There are many, many moving parts there. And
indeed,
sometimes
indeed.
it can be a great investment, sometimes it can be a nightmare, a legal nightmare even, or a maintenance nightmare you're basically entering in. So if you do your research, you can make money out of this. If you don't do your research, or if you do it badly, you're liable to maybe even lose money.
I see. And how should we find a good agent? As you mentioned, it all started with the agent, and the other trickles down. How can we find a good agent in terms of renting or buying a house?
A very good approach will be word of mouth. I personally trust it more than looking at the TV ad or newspaper ad or internet website ad of some kind of an agent. Word of mouth is a very good strategy. Uh, and needless to say, it's easier to get that close to where you live than in a foreign country. Another good strategy is to go for someone who has very good reviews on the internet, as much as you can trust those reviews, because many of them are actually fake. So if you do your research and you think that those reviews are real, then of course reading them will give you some insight.
I see. It depends on their credibility, especially for when we're looking at housing near our area. We should look out and reach out to our neighbor, per se.
Yeah, ask people who already do that, and they will give you valuable advice. And some of that advice will be about the agents who manage this property.
And how viable are alternative housing models, such as co-living spaces, rent-to-own programs, or tiny homes for those who struggle with housing affordability?
Yeah, it, it a tiny house can possibly save you money if you can do that. If it fits your circumstances, for example, if you don't have a big family or no family at all, then you can try it. Absolutely. But at this point, I have to mention that there are many, I wouldn't say scams, but I will say schemes to take advantage of people who desperately need their own house. They have this need to own a place. It's a more psychological need than financial need. They have this need to own this place, to call it their own space, their own property. And some people will fall prey to schemes that try to sell you 50% of the property. So in the UK, for example, where I used to live for 20 years, there are schemes where you buy 50% of the property, or 60 or 40% of the property, and you rent the remaining percentage from a landlord. So you will ever own 50% of the property that you live in. Well, the obvious risk here is that you will never fully own your house, and you are trapped in a situation where you cannot go because you own 50% of this property, and you have to pay rent, which is set by another entity, by a company, forever. So this is going to be a very, very tricky scheme to enter. On the other hand, cohabiting could make sense if you trust someone. It could make sense. It could make more sense if you and your partner or friends, you're all on the same page. It could make sense, but there are risks there. There are definitely risks. What if you fall out, for example? What if you need to change property to live out? Are there any clauses? Did you sign any contract there that limits your mobility, for example? So yeah, you have to look at each situation very carefully. But I will strongly advise against small houses, tiny houses, whatever they're called, because they might make you depressed in the long term. People need space. This is my experience. People need to possibly start a family or cohabit with their partner and stuff like that. So I will advise against that, because if you are depressed, then you cannot perform at work either. I would advise against that, and I would strongly advise against any schemes where you own a percentage of a property and you have to fork out, pay very large amounts of money for the remaining 50% in the form of some kind of a lease payment or rent.
I see. And I just listened to a very interesting topic that you mentioned just now, which is a 50% ownership of land or property. How does that work? Is it on paper? There's two names. Can you explain more on that?
Usually it's a company and yourself, so you buy 50% of a company. That's getting more and more common in the UK and possibly other places of the world. The reason for that is someone cannot afford $1 million to buy the full property, but they can just about afford $500,000. So they buy 50% of the property, which allows you to be a part owner, a co-owner of a property. But for the remainder 50%, for the remainder 50%, you have to pay rent. So you live in that property and you pay rent for the remaining 50% of the value of this property. And this is where the devil is in the details. So how much money are you going to be paying? How much will they be increasing that rent every year? What are the clauses for that? How easily can you sell? At what price can you sell if you want to get rid of your 50% stake in that property? So yeah, the devil is in the details, and usually they're not very good deals. Usually the 50% of the property you buy is overpriced as well. So you pay a lot of money, you get 50% of the property, but that 50% was nearly 80% of another property. It's a lot of money that you pay for that small 50%.
Yeah, and it's a very interesting concept that I've learned today. And why is that appealing to people?
People these days, they have this this impression that if you own property, you are better off. So they do this for financial reasons. So they try to capitalize on any property appreciation in the future. So they do that for that. Another reason they do that is for social reasons, to show that they have property, to show off to their friends and partner, to say, hey mom, hey dad, I made it in life, I own a property now. So for social reasons as well, or family reasons, psychological reasons basically, they need to feel like they are the owner. So between the financial reasons, because there is a misconception that the more you own, the better, and if you own your property, you're definitely hands off, better off than not owning a property. For that and psychological reasons, these people fall prey to companies that offer that 50%, and they will be exploited in the long term.
I see. So in other terms, it's just a very intricate way of renting a property to someone else.
That's a very good way of putting it, yeah.
I see. Because it's the very first time that I've heard of this concept of co-owning something with a company, because I've never heard of that. It's usually just either renting, cohabiting and living, and buying a property with that amount of money. So does that mean co-owning, for example, a 500, it's like a $1 million house is not similar to buying a $500,000 house? So it's like bigger and maybe geographically better?
It can be smaller as well. It can be smaller. It can
Oh,
be a small house and you buy 50% of it. And this is directed at people with very low budgets, very low salaries, who feel this need to own something. So yeah, it can be small houses as well. And in the UK, they're mostly new houses. So they build those houses. They're very expensive because they're brand new as well. So there is another factor there. And that people like a brand new house. And because people
indeed.
cannot fork out $500,000 for this or more, 700,000 Australian dollars, because they cannot fork out something like that, they end up buying half of it. And the other half is usually is owned by the company that built it. But not necessarily. It can also be a company that bought it from the builders and then tries to rent it out, basically, to get the capital back plus rent it out with very bad terms. Yeah, you have to be very, very careful against those schemes.
Yeah, and that's very interesting because getting out of that is quite difficult as well because you're not completely selling your property. You're only selling 50% of your stakes for your property. Yeah, indeed. And what lessons can we learn from previous housing market crashes that younger generations should be aware of today?
Quality properties that own land, for example, properties that have some kind of a unique characteristic, a positive unique characteristic. These properties will be safer over a long term, no matter what happens. So there may be a crisis like in 2008, prices will fall down by 30%, but lo and behold, 10 years later, the house is worth even more than it did before the crisis. So with a quality property, you're relatively safe in the long term. I have to stress the long term here. We're talking about many years. So even if there is a property, you will eventually a crisis. Eventually, you will get your money back. The property value will recover. But you can well have a crisis, and some properties can fall and never rise, never rise
Indeed.
again. So, for example, I am Greek. My accent is Greek. There was a big crisis in 2010. That's more than 15 years ago. Property prices still haven't recovered from that crisis in 2010. It was a national specific crisis more than a global crisis. You have a similar situation in Sri Lanka at the moment. Real estate has collapsed. Will real estate really recover in all cases? I'm not quite sure. So there are crises, they do harm the value of properties, and the low quality properties will be harmed more and they have less of a chance to rise back to those heights in the future.
I see. And what are your stances on buying apartment instead of buying a landed house that's on land?
I think buying something with land will give you more certainty, more stability, and it will hold its value in a crisis much more. Having said so, these days to buy something with land, you have to move far out of the city. So there are many hidden costs when it comes to that. Commuting costs, for example, loss of opportunities. You cannot work as hard because you have to commute for 1.5 hours to go back to your landed property. So there is a loss of opportunity, but as a property per se, it should maintain its value better, and you're also safer against service charges. Service charges, for example, maintenance costs. You own this place, you're the full master of it, and you don't have to pay the overheads of a company that maintains it. So yeah, that's a good thing. So
Would you?
you basically have to look at the particulars of your career, of how far it is out of the city, all that stuff. Yeah.
I see. So it really has. So we really have to look at our lifestyle and how our work choices, so that it really outweighs the cons.
Yeah, yeah.
And I just want to talk about metropolitan cities such as probably Seoul, Jakarta, and cities with a lot of skyscrapers and with little land. So in those cases, buying apartments would be more worth it instead of buying far in the suburbs houses, landed houses.
Yeah, yeah. In those cities, like in all cities, the best jobs are downtown. People these days work long hours anyway, so it will make sense to buy something closer to where you live than commute for hours every day, exhaust yourself even before you go to work, spend a lot of
Indeed.
money on all this commuting. So yeah, as we said earlier, the biggest source of income ever will be your career, and the money you will earn from your career are multiples from the money you will earn from any property appreciation, property value appreciation. So yeah, yeah, be close
I see.
to your career, to your job.
I see. So it's more to gaining more earning power so that in the future, if you'd like to buy a house or any types of property, we can have more leverage in buying any of those.
Yep.
And all in all, what are the main points that individuals should consider when deciding between renting and purchasing a home if they would like to get a conclusion out of that?
Three things. I will summarize it in three things. The most important thing is, as I keep on saying, don't harm your career. Don't lock yourself to a little town with very low salaries for the sake of owning a cheap property there. So the big thing is your career. Don't harm that. The second thing is beware of the hidden costs. The hidden costs of ownership, maintenance, servicing charges, the risk of capital depreciation, which can happen, commuting. Don't lose sight of that because it can amount to a lot of money over the years. And the third thing is don't hurry. Don't hurry. If you get a good opportunity, it will manifest itself. It will be very obvious that this is a very good opportunity. It will be a no brainer, as they say in the UK. Um, so this opportunity will manifest itself, and it will be very obvious that this is a very good opportunity. Do not rush to own a property because it's far more likely you will fall prey to some kind of a scheme. You will buy something that is overpriced. You will buy something that is not suitable for you. It's too far from where you work or limits you geographically or professionally. So don't hurry. You will impress your parents in due course. You will throw this big housewarming party down the line. It is inevitable. Don't hurry. Because people will be saying on your face, yeah, well done. And then when you turn your back, they will be saying, what kind of a place is this? How much did he pay? Why this place? So don't try to impress people. Don't try to buy anything for psychological reasons. Don't buy into all that. And take care of your career. Yeah, that's what I would say.
That's a really great advice. And what practice would you do in when deciding renting and buying a house? When you are at the fork road and you're trying to decide that, what practice would you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, you have to compare the costs, hidden and obvious costs. And as I keep on saying again and again, you have to factor in what this will mean for your career because this is where the big money comes from in your life. Your career over 30, 40 years is worth many, many, many millions of Australian dollars. So, or US dollars, which are nearly double in value, I think. So it's worth a lot of money over the next 30, 40 years. Do not jeopardize that. And particularly do not jeopardize your education. Now, provided that you don't jeopardize that, provided that it's not harming your career, make sure that you factor in all the costs and make sure that what you buy will be suitable for a little bit further down the line when you will possibly like to, cohabit with a partner or have a family. Look at it in a little bit more long-term way.
Thank you very much for explaining that. And now we can get into the open mic session where you can talk about anything that you're passionate about, and it doesn't have to be related to the topic or anything that you'd like to extend from the topic. And the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. I would just like to say that we live in an era where many financial stuff, many assets, as we say, are inflated. So very expensive crypto, very expensive property, extremely expensive stock market. And the more those assets go up in value, the more we feel like a pressure to go and buy ourselves because we have the fear of missing out. So I would advise just resist, keep on saving your money, okay, and the market will fall soon. The Bitcoin prices will crash, the stock market will crash as well. The real estate will crash much, much less in most countries, much, much less. But it will cool at some point. Do not buy into the pressure of owning something or purchasing an asset. So I would just say that because there are bubbles everywhere. We live in an era where the greatest economists, not just me, the greatest economists, people far smarter than me, agree that there is a big bubble in many, many assets. And rein in, fight your desire to buy something now. Save your money, take care of your career, educate yourself, learn a skill or a trade, learn it well, and everything will fall into place in the long term.
Thank you very much for your advice. That's a very good one because as the younger generation, we are usually quite impatient with that. And if our listeners want to find out more about you, Alex, where should they go?
They can, explore my LinkedIn profile where I offer my publications, my academic publications, and occasionally some thoughts about things. So yeah, my LinkedIn profile is a good way to find out more.
Yeah, all right, everyone. You can check that out on the links below. And thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Wealth Pathways, the Affluence Science Insights Podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website at affluence.lifemanagementsciencelabs.com, where you can join our movement. I'm Marie Stella. Thanks for tuning in.